The forgotten street morning was gray and heavy with mist as Sundar Pichai stepped out of his hotel. His schedule was packed with meetings, speeches, and interviews. His phone kept buzzing in his pocket, but today, for some reason he couldn't name, he chose to silence it. He needed air. He needed to walk. He didn't tell his assistant where he was going. The streets of the small European town were quiet at this hour, with just a few shopkeepers sweeping their doorsteps. Sundar liked to disappear like this sometimes. To feel normal, to hear his own thoughts. That as he walked further from the main square, the buildings grew older and more faded. Vines crept up stone walls, windows were cracked, and the paint peeled from doors. He passed a bakery and smelled bread so warm and sweet it made his stomach ache. Children's laughter echoed from a narrow alley nearby, but when he turned his head, the alley was empty. He kept walking. Then he saw her. An elderly woman stood at the corner of a forgotten street. She was very small, almost frail, wrapped in a thin shawl even though the air was not cold. Her hair was white and pulled back neatly, but her shoes were worn, and the bag in her hand looked heavy for her thin arms. Sundar slowed down. Something about her made him stop. She didn't seem to see him at first. She was staring at the ground, her lips moving as if whispering to herself. Sundar glanced around. No one else was there. She shifted the bag from one hand to the other and winced. The bag slipped and fell to the pavement, spilling its contents, bread, apples, a small glass jar of something dark and sticky. The jar rolled toward him. Sundar bent to pick it up and handed it back to her. "Here," he said softly. She looked up, startled. Then her eyes met his. And he froze. There was something about those eyes. They were watery but sharp, as though they carried whole decades of pain and wisdom. She whispered something he didn't catch. "Sorry," he said. She straightened and spoke louder this time. "You should not stop here." Sundar blinked. Why not? But before she could answer, she stumbled forward. He caught her by the arm. Her shawl slipped off her shoulder, revealing a deep scar running along her collarbone. He tried not to stare, but couldn't help it. She noticed his gaze and smiled, not kindly, but sadly. "I carry many stories," she murmured. "Then tell me," Sundar said before he could stop himself. She shook her head. "Not here." Then she turned and started walking down the forgotten street. Sundar hesitated. He had a meeting in less than an hour. His assistant would already be panicking. Yet something about this woman pulled at him harder than any meeting ever could, so he followed. The street grew narrower. Weeds grew through cracks in the stones. The air smelled faintly of earth and something else, something metallic. The buildings leaned inward as if trying to listen. They passed a crumbling archway with strange symbols carved into it. "Where are we going?" he asked. She didn't answer. Then, without looking back, she spoke. "You remind me of someone who," Sundar asked. She stopped so suddenly that he nearly bumped into her. She turned and looked him straight in the eyes. "My son." Sundar felt his chest tighten. He wanted to say something, but before he could, she started walking again. They came to a wooden door set into a stone wall. It was so old and weathered it almost blended into the building. She pulled a key from her pocket, a key so thin and rusty he wondered how it could still turn a lock and open the door. She stepped inside and motioned for him to follow. He did. The room smelled of herbs and dust. Light slanted through a high window, catching motes that danced like tiny stars. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars and boxes, old photographs and faded books. In the center stood a table with 2 chairs. She sat down on one, setting her heavy bag beside her. He remained standing. "Sit," she said firmly. He obeyed. She leaned forward. "You look like him," she said quietly. "Like my son. Same eyes, same way of walking, same restlessness." "Where is he now?" Sundar asked. She lowered her gaze. "Dead." He felt the word hit him like a stone. "I'm sorry. You shouldn't be," she replied. He chose his path. Then she reached into her bag and took out an old, folded letter. She placed it on the table between them. "He wrote this the day he died." Sundar stared at it. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because," she said, "you remind me so much of him, and because you stopped." He swallowed hard. "What does it say?" "Read." With trembling fingers, Sundar unfolded the letter. The paper was thin and yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. He began to read. "Dear Mother," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I've made my choice. Don't cry for me. I only wanted to make you proud. I thought the world was a place where good men could change things. But I was wrong. They don't let good men win here. Forgive me. I'll love you always." Sundar stopped. He looked up at her. "What happened to him?" he asked. Her hands tightened on the edge of the table. "They broke him," she whispered, who she leaned closer. "The same people you sit with in your meetings. The same ones who smile in photographs. They broke him because he spoke the truth." Sundar felt a chill run down his spine. "What was his name?" he asked. She stared at him. Then she said a name so quietly he almost didn't hear it. And when he did, the blood drained from his face. Because it was a name he knew. "That can't be," he said, but she only nodded. Just then, outside, there was a sharp sound. Footsteps, heavy and fast. She stood abruptly. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. "Why not?" he demanded. She grabbed his arm. "Because now, they'll come for you too." The door rattled. A voice called from outside in a language Sundar didn't understand. The woman's grip on him tightened. "Listen to me," she said urgently. "You can still leave, but if you do, you must forget everything you've seen. If you stay." The door creaked. "Then there's no turning back." He looked at her, then at the letter still lying open on the table. He heard his own heart pounding. The door burst open, and everything changed. Asterisk the letters, secret, door slammed open. So hard the shelves trembled, and a gust of cold air swept into the room. Sundar's breath caught in his chest. 3 men stood there in the doorway, blocking the light. They wore dark coats and heavy boots. Their faces were hard and unreadable, their eyes sharp and cold, like glass. One of them stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Sundar. The elderly woman rose slowly, her shoulders squared, though her hands were shaking. She moved between Sundar and the men, as if shielding him with her frail body. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but steady. "He is not part of this," she said. The tallest man let out a short, humorless laugh. "Then why is he here?" he asked. His accent was thick, and each word seemed to weigh more than the last. Dots felt sweat gather at the back of his neck. He didn't move. He didn't even breathe. The woman's fingers dug into the table behind her, and her knuckles turned white. The tallest man took another step inside, and the other 2 followed. Their boots left faint prints in the dust on the floor. He turned his attention to Sundar, now tilting his head slightly as if studying him like some strange specimen. "You don't belong here," the man said softly, almost kindly, but his eyes stayed cold. "I was just I began, but..." The words stuck in his throat. He glanced at the woman for help, but she only shook her head ever so slightly. Then the tallest man reached across the table and plucked the letter from where Sundar had left it. He unfolded it and read quickly. His lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "You read this?" the man asked, without looking up. Sundar swallowed hard. "Yes," he admitted. The man folded the letter carefully, like a priest, handling some holy relic, and tucked it into his coat pocket. Then he leaned close to Sundar, so close Sundar could smell the faint scent of leather and tobacco on him. "That was not meant for you," he whispered. Something in his tone made Sundar flinch. The woman spoke again, louder this time. "He does not know what it means. Let him go." The man straightened. His hand hovered over the pocket where he'd put the letter, then dropped to his side. He stared at Sundar for what felt like hours. Finally, he said, "You've already stayed too long." Then he turned to leave. The other 2 followed without a word. Before they stepped outside, the tallest man looked back at the woman. "You're running out of time," he said simply. The door closed with a quiet click, but it might as well have been an explosion in Sundar's ears. He sat frozen, staring at the wooden grain of the table. His mind raced, but every thought slipped away before he could catch it. The woman slumped back into her chair, her body suddenly looking 10 years older. She covered her face with both hands and sat like that for a long moment, as though trying to catch her breath. Sundar finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "What just happened? Who are they?" She lowered her hand slowly and fixed him with a look so full of sorrow and defiance it made him shiver. "They are the ones who broke my son," she said. The words hung in the air, like smoke. Sundar stared at her, unsure if he'd heard right. "What do they want with you?" he asked. She gave a small, bitter laugh. "What they have always wanted. Silence." He sat back, feeling the weight of the letter in his mind. "Who was your son really?" he asked quietly. "And why does his name? Why do I know it?" She nodded at the question, as though she had been expecting it all along. Then she leaned forward and began to speak. "My son was born in this very town. He grew up dreaming of fixing what was broken in the world. He believed in fairness, in honesty, in the kind of justice they write about in books, but never practice in real life. He studied hard, earned respect, and when the time came, he uncovered something too big, too dangerous." Sundar's heart was beating faster now. "What did he uncover?" he asked. The woman stared at him for a long moment, then got up. Her steps were slow, but her movements had purpose. She walked to a tall shelf in the corner and reached high, pulling down a small, locked wooden box. She carried it back to the table and set it down in front of him. "The rest of his story is in here," she said. "If you open it, you cannot close it again." Sundar looked at the box. It was dark wood, carved with strange patterns. It seemed to hum faintly under his fingers when he touched it. "I shouldn't," he said, but even as he spoke, his fingers were already finding the tiny keyhole. "You can still walk away," the woman warned. "Forget everything. Pretend this morning never happened." But Sundar knew he couldn't. Not now. He looked up at her and said, "Give me the key." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, wordlessly, she reached into her shawl and handed him a small iron key. It was cold and heavy in his palm. With a soft click, he unlocked the box and lifted the lid. Inside was a thick envelope, sealed with wax. There was also a small black and white photograph of a young man standing proudly on the same street outside, his eyes bright, his smile unbroken. Sundar picked up the envelope and broke the seal. The pages inside were covered with neat handwriting. He began to read, and the words made the air around him seem to grow colder. To whoever reads this, it began. I have hidden the truth here because the truth has become too dangerous to speak aloud. What you hold in your hands is proof of what they are doing to all of us. They control everything, the banks, the press, the courts. They choose who succeeds and who disappears. I tried to warn people. I tried to fight. But when you fight them, you don't win. You only delay what they do to you. The letter went on, naming names, powerful names, and describing events Sundar vaguely remembered from news stories years ago. But the way they were written here, the way the pieces fit together, it painted a picture so dark, so complete. He felt his stomach turn. He looked up at the woman. Why are you showing me this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She sat very still. Because, she said, you are one of the few who still can do something about it. Sundar shook his head. I don't even know what this is. These are just stories. They're not stories, she said firmly. They're your world. You've been living in it without seeing. He stared down at the papers again, his hands trembling now. He thought about his own life, the meetings, the contracts, the people he worked with every day. And suddenly, pieces of memory began to fit together in ways they hadn't before. Things he had brushed off as coincidence, or politics, or misfortune, now they made sense. He pushed the papers away and leaned back, his chest tight. If this is real, he said slowly, why me? The woman met his gaze with eyes that were calm but full of something deeper, expectation, maybe even hope. Because you stopped, she said simply. No one stops anymore. Before Sundar could respond, the door creaked open again. This time, it was not the men from before. A young girl stood in the doorway, maybe 12 or 13 years old. She wore a faded coat and carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Her eyes were wide and frightened. They're coming back, she said breathlessly. The woman rose instantly. How long? She asked. The girl shook her head. Not long, maybe minutes. The woman turned to Sundar, her voice urgent now. You need to decide, she said. You can take the box and run, or you can stay and face them. But you cannot do both. Sundar felt his heart hammering as he stared at the papers in front of him, then at the woman, then at the frightened child in the doorway. He felt as though he were standing on the edge of something vast and dark, and whatever choice he made next would change everything. The woman's voice cut through his thoughts. Choose now, she said. Outside, footsteps began to echo again. Louder this time, closer. Sundar reached for the box, then he stopped, because from outside came a single sound that froze him in place. A voice, calling his name. Not his first name, not his last, but his full name, spoken clearly and coldly. He turned toward the door, just as the handle began to turn, and a shadow fell across the room. The shadow at the door's handle moved slowly at first, as though whoever stood outside was savoring the moment. Sundar felt every muscle in his body tighten. The box lay open on the table before him, the letter still trembling slightly in his hands. The girl backed away from the door, her small bundle clutched to her chest. The elderly woman did not move at all. Her eyes were locked on the door, her breathing steady but shallow. She had been expecting this. Sundar realized then that she had known all along it would end like this, and still, she had shown him everything. The door creaked open just enough for a single figure to slip inside. But this figure was not like the others. He was younger, perhaps in his 30s, dressed simply but impeccably, a gray coat, polished shoes, a scarf that fell just so against his chest. His hair was dark and neat, his expression calm yet unyielding, and those eyes. They were the kind of eyes Sundar had only seen in boardrooms and behind cameras. Eyes that could watch someone unravel and not blink once. The man stepped fully into the room and shut the door behind him with a quiet click. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier. Sundar couldn't tear his gaze away. The man looked around slowly, his eyes lingering on the shelves of jars, the faded books, the dusty photographs, and then finally on Sundar himself. A small smile tugged at his lips, not of friendliness, but of recognition. So, the man said softly, you opened the box. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Sundar tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He swallowed hard and forced himself to say something, anything. Who are you? The man tilted his head slightly, as though the question amused him. Someone who has been watching you for a very long time, he replied. His voice was quiet, but carried a weight that filled the room. He took a slow step closer to the table. You've done well for yourself. Climbed very high, met the right people, kept your hands clean. Until now. The woman finally moved, then, placing herself between Sundar and the man, her voice was sharp. Leave him alone. He doesn't belong to you. The man's smile didn't fade, but his eyes hardened. He doesn't belong to you either, he said, but here he is, caught in the middle, just like your son was. Do you really want him to end the same way? The woman flinched slightly at that, but she didn't step aside. Instead, she stood taller, her voice shaking with both anger and something else. Grief. You took everything from me once, she said. You won't take him too. The man glanced at Sundar, then back at her. That depends on him, he said simply. He turned his attention fully to Sundar now, taking another measured step. Closer, Sundar could see his own reflection in the man's eyes. Small, uncertain, trapped. Do you have a choice? The man said, his tone almost gentle. Walk out that door right now and forget you ever saw this room, that letter, that box. Go back to your perfect life. Pretend none of it ever happened. Or, he gestured faintly toward the open box on the table. Or you can stay, and you will not walk out of here the same man. If you even walk out at all. Sundar felt the weight of every word pressed down on him. His hands tightened into fists on his lap. He thought about the woman's son, about the sorrow in her eyes when she'd spoken of him. He thought about the girl still standing by the wall, silent and afraid, clutching her little bundle as though it held her whole world. And he thought about himself, the man who had stopped when everyone else kept walking. He forced himself to meet the man's cold gaze. Why me? He asked again. The man's smile faded completely this time. His eyes narrowed just slightly. Because, he said softly, we can't let you be anything else. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. Sundar instinctively recoiled, but it wasn't a weapon. It was a simple brass key, tarnished and old. The man placed it on the table next to the box. If you take this, the man said, you open a door you can never close. And you don't just carry your own story anymore, you carry hers. He nodded toward the woman. His tapped the box lightly. And all the others who came before you. It is not a burden you can set down again. Sundar stared at the key. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He whispered, what happens if I take it? The man leaned in slightly, his voice so low it was almost a hiss. Everything changes. Everything you thought you knew. Everything you built. It will all look different, and the people you trust most will no longer be the people you can trust at all. The woman's hand shot out suddenly, snatching the key off the table. She held it tightly in her fist, her eyes blazing. Enough, she said, her voice shaking with rage. You don't own him. You don't decide. The man raised an eyebrow, but otherwise remained calm. Then give him the key, he said. If you think he deserves it, if you think he can bear it, go ahead. Her hand trembled as she slowly extended it toward Sundar. The key lay in her open palm now, dull but heavy with meaning. Her eyes searched his face, pleading and warning all at once. You don't have to, she whispered. But Sundar could hear what she didn't say. But if you don't, no one else will. He reached out, his fingers hovering just above the key. He could feel the weight of everyone in the room watching him, waiting. Even the silence seemed alive, pressing in on him from all sides. Before he could touch it, the girl suddenly darted forward. Her bundle fell open on the floor, and Sundar caught a glimpse of what lay inside. Another letter, thicker than the first, bound with string, and something small and black that gleamed like a polished stone. The girl scooped it up quickly, but not before the man saw it too. His calm broke for the first time. His jaw tightened, his voice sharp and cutting. Where did you get that? He demanded. The girl shrank back, clutching her bundle to her chest. The woman stepped in front of her protectively, her voice fierce. She has nothing to do with this, she said, but the man ignored her. His gaze was locked on the girl now, and there was a dangerous edge in his tone. Give it to me, he said. The girl shook her head, tears starting to fill her eyes. No, she whispered. The man's hand moved toward his coat again, and this time Sundar was certain there was no key in there. Instinct took over. Sundar stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. Stop, he said, his voice stronger than he felt. The man turned slowly toward him, eyes narrowed. You don't understand what you're doing, the man said. Maybe not, Sundar replied, his breath coming fast. Now, but neither do you, because you don't know what I'll choose. For a moment, everything hung in perfect stillness, the woman's breath quick and shallow, the girl's hands trembling around her bundle, the man's icy stare locked on Sundar, and then, without thinking, Sundar reached down and closed his fingers around the key in the woman's palm. It was cold, colder than he expected. The man's expression hardened. So, he said quietly, almost sadly, you've chosen. He straightened his coat, gave Sundar one last unreadable look, and without another word, he turned and walked out the door. The sound of his footsteps faded into silence. Sundar stood there, the key heavy in his hand. His pulse pounded in his ears. The woman slowly sank back into her chair, her face pale but resolute. The girl collapsed onto the floor, hugging her bundle tightly. Sundar stared at the door the man had left through, and for the first time all day, he felt truly afraid, not of what had just happened, but of what was coming next. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a sound rose from somewhere outside, a long, low wail, like a siren but deeper, more human somehow. It seemed to come from the very stones of the street, a sound of warning or mourning, or both. The woman's eyes widened. She grabbed Sundar's hand and whispered, her voice fierce and desperate. You need to run. Now, take the key. Take the box. Take her to, and run. The girl looked up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with terror, but also a strange kind of trust. Sundar's breath caught as he realized she was waiting for him to decide, just as the woman had waited. And outside, the sound grew louder, closer. Sundar looked down at the key in his hand, then at the girl, then at the door. Already rattling again, as more shadows gathered on the other side, he tightened his grip on the key and took his first step toward the unknown. The chase through the silent streets. The door shuddered as another blow landed on it from the outside. The wood groaned, but held. Sundar felt his breath catch in his chest, the air in the room growing heavier, hotter with each passing second. The key dug into his palm like a tiny blade, and he was aware of the girl staring at him, her dark eyes wide and waiting. The woman gave his arm a final squeeze, a wordless farewell, then reached for the box and shoved it toward him with more strength than he expected. Go, she hissed, both of you. Now Sundar didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat was tight, his mind a blur of questions and fear, but his legs moved. The girl scrambled to her feet and followed, still clutching her bundle to her chest. Together, they slipped through a narrow door at the back of the room, just as the front door finally cracked and a flood of shadows poured inside. The back door led to a steep, crumbling staircase that spiraled downward into darkness. The air smelled damp and old, like stone and forgotten memories. Sundar stumbled once but caught himself, his fingers brushing the icy walls as they descended. Behind them, faintly, he could hear voices now, sharp, angry, coming closer. When they finally reached the bottom, they found themselves in a long, narrow tunnel. Dim light filtered in from cracks above, casting pale beams that danced like ghosts across the uneven ground. The girl darted ahead, her small figure surprisingly quick, her thin shoes barely making a sound. Sundar followed, his breath loud in his own ears, the box and the key clutched tightly in his hands. They ran like that for what felt like forever. The tunnel twisting and narrowing, then opening wide enough to reveal old wooden doors and rusted lanterns long since dead. He caught flashes of old graffiti on the walls, words and symbols he didn't understand, and once, in the faint light, he thought he saw a name scratched into the stone, the same name that had been written on the letter upstairs. The girl finally stopped at a grate set high in the wall. She turned to him, her cheeks flushed and her breathing fast. Here, she whispered. This way. She crouched and pressed her shoulder against the metal grate. It groaned loudly but gave way under her weight. Cold morning air rushed in through the opening, carrying with it the faint sounds of the street above, footsteps, distant voices, the occasional bark of a dog. Sundar hesitated only a second before pushing the box through and climbing after her. He emerged into an alley so narrow and dark. It felt more like another tunnel than a street. The walls rose high on either side, dripping with moisture, and the stones beneath his feet were slick and uneven. The girl didn't wait. She tugged at his sleeve and started running again, weaving through the maze of alleys with a sure-footedness that told him she had done this many times before. Behind them, faint at first but growing louder, came the sound of boots striking stone. Not just one pair, but many. Sundar's chest burned with the effort of keeping up, but he forced himself to stay with her. She darted left, then right, then ducked through an archway barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. At one point, they burst into a wider street, only to hear shouts at the far end. The girl froze for half a second, her eyes scanning the shadows, then pulled him back into another narrow passage. Everywhere they went, it seemed, the streets were empty of ordinary life, no vendors, no children, no curious faces peering from windows. It was as though the entire town had been emptied, leaving only the echo of their flight and the relentless rhythm of their pursuers. Boots. Finally, they reached a small square, paved with cracked stones and surrounded by buildings that leaned precariously toward one another. In the center stood an old fountain, its basin dry and choked with weeds. The girl skidded to a stop beside it and dropped to her knees, running her hands over the stones at its base. "What are you doing?" Sundar demanded, his voice louder than he intended. "Help me," she whispered fiercely. Together, they searched, their fingers scraping over the rough stone, until she found what she was looking for, a loose slab, worn smooth with age. She wedged her tiny fingers beneath it and lifted with a grunt. Beneath the slab was a dark hole, just wide enough for them to fit through one at a time. The girl looked up at him then, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, her eyes bright with something he couldn't name. Fear, yes, but also determination, and something like trust. "Go," she urged. "I'll follow." He hesitated, staring into the blackness of the hole. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder, now close enough that he could hear individual voices shouting orders. The slap of boots against stone, the metallic rattle of something heavy being dragged. He took a deep breath and slipped into the hole. It was even darker than he expected. The air was thick and musty, and the space was so tight he had to crawl on hands and knees. The box pressed awkwardly against his chest. The stones scraped at his back and shoulders, but he kept moving, feeling the girl's small hands occasionally push against his feet from behind, urging him forward. The tunnel twisted and dipped, then rose again sharply before opening into another chamber, larger this time, lit by faint shafts of light filtering down from somewhere far above. He pulled himself out of the hole and helped the girl up behind him. They both collapsed against the damp wall, gasping for breath. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "You shouldn't have taken the key." He turned to look at her, startled by the calm certainty in her tone. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her bundle and pulled out the black stone he had glimpsed earlier. Up close, it wasn't a stone at all. It was some kind of device. Small and smooth, with faint lines etched into its surface. It pulsed faintly in the dim light, as though alive. "Because," she said at last, "they're not chasing you anymore." Sundar's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze then, her expression grave and far older than her years. "They're chasing me now," she said. The words hit him like ice water. He shook his head, confused. "But why? What is that thing? What does it do?" She held it up between them, and for the first time, he saw the faint outline of a symbol glowing at its center, the same symbol that had been carved into the old wooden box, the same one he'd seen scratched on the tunnel wall earlier. "This," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is the proof they couldn't find, and now they'll do anything to get it back." Before he could respond, a faint noise echoed from the tunnel they had just crawled through, boots striking stone again. Closer this time, more deliberate. The girl tucked the device back into her bundle and got to her feet. "We can't stop here," she said firmly. "If they catch us now, it's over." Sundar stood as well, his legs still shaking, the box under his arm and the key in his pocket, feeling heavier than ever. He looked around the chamber. There were several dark passages leading away, but no sign of which might lead to safety. "Which way?" he asked. The girl's eyes darted around, scanning the walls, the floor, the faint marks left by water and time. Finally, she pointed to the smallest of the passages, barely wide enough for them to pass through. "That way," she said. "Trust me." He didn't have time to argue. As they slipped into the darkness once more, Sundar felt the air grow colder and tighter, the stones slick beneath his hands. The sound of pursuit faded behind them at first, but then, just as he began to hope they might have lost them, a sharp metallic clang rang out from somewhere very close by, followed by a voice that chilled him to his bones. It wasn't shouting this time. It was calling his name again, softly. "Sundar." He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The girl tugged at his sleeve, urging him forward, but he couldn't move. The voice came again, closer now, more insistent. "Sundar, stop running. You know how this ends." His heart hammered in his chest as he stared into the darkness ahead, and for just a moment, he thought he saw two faint, cold eyes staring back at him from the blackness of the passage. The girl grabbed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't listen," she whispered fiercely, but the voice kept calling. "Sundar, you can't save her. You can't even save yourself." He tightened his grip on the key, forcing himself to take another step forward, and then another. But even as they ran deeper into the unknown, the voice followed, soft, relentless, and full of the kind of certainty that terrified him more than anything else. "Sundar, you already chose wrong." The truth beneath the city's passage narrowed further, until Sundar could feel the rough walls scraping against his shoulders with every step. The girl moved ahead of him now, her small frame darting into the shadows, her breathing quick but even, as though she had run these tunnels all her life. Behind them, the voice still floated in the darkness, soft, steady, and terrifying in its certainty. "Sundar, stop. There is nothing at the end of this but regret." He tried to shut it out, but the words seemed to seep into his skin, curling into his mind like smoke. The girl looked back once and caught his eye. Her expression was fierce. She didn't say anything, she didn't have to, but he felt the weight of what she was telling him without words. "Keep going." The tunnel finally opened into a vast underground chamber, so large Sundar had to stop and catch his breath. Just from the sight of it, high above, broken slabs of stone formed a jagged ceiling, and faint light spilled through cracks in the earth, catching on the dust that hung like a silver mist. The floor was paved with ancient tiles, worn smooth and etched with strange symbols, the same ones he'd seen on the box. On the walls, on the girl's device. At the center of the chamber stood a door. It wasn't attached to any wall or building. It simply stood alone, tall and dark, framed by an arch of stone. It was covered in carvings that seemed to shimmer faintly as he looked at them, and set into the center was a small, round hole, exactly the size and shape of the key that burned now in his pocket. The girl stopped at the edge of the tiles, staring at the door. Her bundle slipped slightly from her arms, and she clutched it tighter, as though afraid of what it would do if she let go. Sundar stepped up beside her, unable to tear his eyes from the door. "What is this place?" he whispered. The girl didn't look at him. "This is where it ends," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was something final in it, or where it begins. Sundar's fingers itched toward the key. "What's on the other side?" he asked. For the first time she turned to look at him. Her dark eyes glimmered in the faint light. "Everything they've been hiding," she said. "Everything you didn't want to see, and everything you can never forget." Her words made the air feel heavier somehow. Sundar stepped closer to the door, and as he did, he felt a strange heat rise up from the tiles beneath his feet. The carvings on the door seemed to shift and ripple, forming new shapes the longer he looked, faces, perhaps, or eyes, or something, older and more alien than either. Behind him, the voice called again, louder now, echoing off the chamber walls. "Sundar, don't do this. You won't come back from it. No one ever does." He turned and saw a shadow moving at the edge of the tunnel they'd come through. Tall, patient, and waiting. The man from before stepped into the faint light, his coat immaculate, his shoes still polished. Though his eyes, this time, were not calm. They blazed with something sharp and hungry. "Give me the key," the man said softly, his hand outstretched. "You don't understand what you're holding." Sundar backed away a step, the key tight in his grip. "Then, tell me," he said. His voice cracked but held. The man's eyes narrowed. "You think this is about truth?" he asked. "About justice? It's not. It's about balance. And if you open that door, you upset everything. Not just for you. For everyone." The girl's voice cut through his words, strong and sure. "He's lying," she said. The man's gaze flicked to her, full of contempt. "You," he spat, "don't even know what you've stolen." The girl stepped closer to Sundar, her small hand resting briefly on his arm. "You already chose," she said, and he realized then she was right. He turned back to the door, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. His fingers found the key, still cold and heavy, and slid it into the waiting hole. The carvings on the door flared faintly at his touch. The man shouted something behind him, but Sundar didn't hear. The world had narrowed to the sound of the key turning in the lock. A deep, resonant click echoed through the chamber. The air seemed to shift warmer, sharper, and the carvings on the door came alive, the symbols glowing brighter and brighter, until Sundar had to shield his eyes. And then the door began. Two open dots swung inward silently, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. But it wasn't empty. At first, Sundar thought it was just shadow. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw shapes moving inside, vast and slow, like smoke, given form. He could hear a sound, too low and deep, like voices all speaking at once from somewhere far away. He felt himself step forward before he even realized it. The heat grew stronger, and the air smelled strange, metallic, almost sweet. "Don't," the man called from behind him, his voice tight with anger. "Now, you don't know what's in there. You think you're saving something, but you're just—" He stopped speaking, because the light from the doorway flared suddenly, casting him back into shadow. Sundar turned just enough to see the man shielding his face, retreating a step, and he realized whatever was behind the door. It terrified him. That thought gave Sundar strength. He tightened his grip on the box, felt the girl's small hand, still resting on his sleeve, and stepped fully across the threshold. The darkness swallowed him immediately. At first there was nothing, no sound, no ground beneath his feet, no air in his lungs, only the faint warmth of the girl's hand. And then even that slipped away. He was alone. Then the voices came. They rose all around him, soft at first, like whispers in the dark. He could feel them brushing against his skin, curling around his thoughts. Some spoke in words he understood, others in languages he didn't know, but somehow still felt. "You see now?" you asked. We answered. "You wanted truth. But truth doesn't want you." And then images began to flash before him, not quite memories, not quite dreams. He saw himself in the boardrooms, shaking hands with people whose smiles never reached their eyes. He saw the woman in her little shop, weeping silently over the first letter. He saw the girl, running through empty streets, clutching her bundle to her chest. And then he saw more. He saw vast machines turning beneath the earth. He saw papers signed in secret rooms, names crossed out with ruthless precision. He saw men and women who spoke of progress while planting seeds of ruin. And he saw himself at the center of it all, standing on a tightrope stretched between what he was and what he could be. The voices grew louder now, sharper. "Choose deceit, or stay blind. Give yourself to this, or walk away and forget." He felt something hard press against his palm. The key, still there, still cold. And then another. Wait, the girl's device, now glowing faintly in the darkness. He realized he was holding both, and ahead of him, two paths. One path glimmered faintly with light, but the air above it rippled strangely, and he felt the weight of centuries pressing down on it. The other path was steeped in shadow, but smelled faintly of the world above stone. Rain, bread, and wind. Right behind him, he could still hear the man's voice, faint and fading. "Sundar, it's not too late." And then a sound. Soft at first, then louder, rising from the darkness, a single word spoken by a voice he knew but could not name. "Please." He turned toward the sound.